James and Lisa had been married for almost 10 years. To the outside world, they seemed like the perfect couple. James was a hard-working man, always putting his family first, and Lisa was a stay-at-home mother, taking care of their young daughter, Emily. They lived in a nice house in a quiet neighborhood, and anyone who saw them would think they had a happy life. But inside the walls of their home, things were not as perfect as they seemed. Lisa was not the loving and caring wife people believed her to be. She liked everything to be her way, and if things didn't go as she wanted, she would become cold and distant. James, on the other hand, always tried to keep the peace. He loved his family and didn't want any fights. He believed that if he worked harder, things would get better. At first, Lisa's behavior didn't seem too bad. She would get upset over small things, maybe James coming home a little late from work or not answering her calls right away. But as time passed, her attitude changed. She started blaming James for everything. If Emily got sick, it was James's fault for not buying the right medicines. If they had a financial problem, it was James's fault for not earning enough. No matter what happened, Lisa always found a way to make James feel guilty. James, being a kind and patient man, tried to fix things. He spent more time at home, helped with housework, and even changed his schedule to make Lisa happy. But nothing was ever enough. Lisa always wanted more control, more attention, and more power over every decision in the house. She disliked it whenever James made a choice without asking her first, even if it was something small like what to eat for dinner. Emily, their 6-year-old daughter, loved her parents dearly. She was a bright, happy child who enjoyed playing in the backyard and drawing pictures of her family. But even at her young age, she could sense the tension in the house. She noticed that her father was always quiet, always trying to keep her mother happy. She also saw how her mother's mood would change in an instant, sometimes being sweet and loving, then suddenly becoming angry over the smallest things. One day, Lisa made a shocking decision. She told James she wanted a divorce. She claimed she was unhappy and that James was not a good husband. James was devastated. He had always believed in marriage and had tried his best to be a good husband and father. But he also knew that arguing with Lisa would only make things worse. So, even though it broke his heart, he agreed. At first, James thought they would have a peaceful separation. He was ready to co-parent and share time with Emily because, no matter what happened between him and Lisa, he loved his daughter more than anything in the world. But Lisa had other plans. She did not just want to separate. She wanted full control. She wanted Emily all to herself. James didn't understand why Lisa was being so harsh. He had never done anything wrong to her or Emily. He had never hurt them or neglected them. But Lisa was determined. She started spreading lies about James, telling people he was irresponsible and that Emily was not safe with him. At first, James thought no one would believe her. He had always been a caring and responsible father. But soon, he realized how serious the situation was. Lisa was not just telling people, she was gathering false evidence, twisting facts, and making James look like a bad father in every way possible. And just like that, the perfect family that everyone once admired was falling apart. James knew he had to fight for his daughter, but he had no idea how far Lisa was willing to go to take Emily away from him. James had always believed that the court would be fair. He thought that if he simply told the truth, everything would be fine. After all, he was a loving father who had never done anything wrong. But he soon realized that the fight for Emily was not going to be easy. Lisa was not just trying to win custody. She was trying to destroy his reputation. The first sign of trouble came when James received legal papers. Lisa was demanding full custody of Emily, claiming that James was not fit to be a father. She listed several reasons. He was too busy with work. He did not know how to take care of a child. And worst of all, she suggested that Emily did not feel safe around him. James was shocked. None of it was true. He had always been there for Emily, making sure she was happy, safe, and loved. But Lisa had already started planting these ideas in people's minds. Soon, James noticed that some of his friends and neighbors were looking at him differently. Some even stopped talking to him. It was as if they believed Lisa's words without even hearing his side of the story. James felt frustrated, but he kept reminding himself that the truth would come out. He had nothing to hide. Things got worse when Lisa started bringing false evidence into the case. She showed messages and emails that made James look careless and irresponsible. James knew those messages were either edited or taken out of context, but proving that was not easy. Lisa also had people supporting her, friends, and even some family members who believed her lies. They all stood by her side, saying she was just trying to protect Emily. James struggled to understand why Lisa was doing this. Was she really so determined to take Emily away from him? He had always thought that, despite their differences, they both loved their daughter. But now, it seemed like Lisa cared more about winning than about what was truly best for Emily. As the days passed, James felt the pressure growing. He was told that the court often favored mothers in custody battles, especially when the mother claimed the father was not responsible. He was afraid. What if the judge believed Lisa? What if he lost Emily forever? Despite everything, James refused to give up. He hired a lawyer, gathered evidence of his own, and started preparing for the custody battle. He found pictures, videos, and messages that proved he had always been a loving father. He reached out to people who knew him well, co-workers, friends, and even Emily's teachers, hoping they would speak on his behalf. But the hardest part was seeing Emily caught in the middle. She was just a little girl, too young to fully understand what was happening. Whenever she saw her father, she hugged him tightly, as if afraid he would disappear. James saw the confusion in her eyes. She loved both of her parents, but Lisa was filling her mind with false stories. Sometimes, Emily hesitated when talking to him, as if she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. One day, James overheard Emily asking Lisa a heartbreaking question. "Mommy, do I have to choose between you and Daddy?" Those words broke James's heart. A child should never have to feel that way. He knew that Lisa was trying to turn Emily against him, but he also knew that deep down, Emily loved him and didn't want to lose him. James promised himself that he would fight, not just for his rights as a father, but for Emily's right to have both parents in her life. He didn't know what Lisa's next move would be, but he was sure of one thing. He was not going to let lies take his daughter away from him. James had always believed that honesty and love would be enough to prove he was a good father. But as the custody battle continued, he realized that Lisa was willing to do anything to win, even if it meant destroying his reputation completely. Lisa's accusations grew worse with time. She told the court that James was never involved in Emily's life, that he didn't care about her education, and that he was irresponsible with money. She claimed that Emily often felt unsafe around him, and she even hinted that James had a bad temper. None of it was true, but Lisa knew exactly how to make her lies sound believable. She didn't stop there. She found ways to make James look like an unreliable parent. One day, during one of his supervised visits with Emily, Lisa suddenly showed up with a lawyer and claimed that James had forgotten to bring Emily's medicine. It was a complete lie. Emily wasn't even sick, but Lisa made such a big scene that the court took her words seriously. Every little mistake James made, no matter how small, was used against him. James felt like he was fighting an impossible battle. Every time he tried to prove his innocence, Lisa found new ways to make him look bad. She even convinced some of her friends to testify against him. They told the court that they had seen James being careless with Emily, that he was too busy with work to be a father, and that Lisa was the only one who truly cared for her. James was frustrated, but what hurt the most was seeing how all of this affected Emily. She was just a little girl, caught in a war between her parents. She didn't understand why her mother was saying so many bad things about her father. Sometimes she seemed scared to talk about him, as if she wasn't sure what she was allowed to say. Other times she would whisper to James, telling him how much she missed him. One evening during a short visit, Emily clung to James and said, "Daddy, I don't like when Mommy gets mad at me for talking about you." James's heart broke. He realized that Lisa wasn't just lying to the court. She was also pressuring Emily to take her side. James knew he had to find a way to show the truth, but it wasn't easy. Lisa was smart. She knew how to twist words, how to act like a perfect mother in front of the judge, and how to make James look like the bad guy. Every time James thought he was making progress, Lisa came up with a new accusation. His lawyer warned him that the court often believed the mother in custody cases, especially when she claimed to be protecting the child. James couldn't understand why the system worked that way. He had never done anything wrong, but he felt like he was being treated as if he had. As the court dates continued, James started to lose hope. He had gathered evidence, found witnesses who could speak for him, and done everything he could to prove he was a good father. But Lisa's lies had already done too much damage. Then, one day, something changed. James noticed that Emily was becoming quieter. She didn't seem like her usual happy self. She hesitated before speaking, as if she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. He realized that Lisa's pressure was making Emily feel trapped. She loved both of her parents, but she didn't know how to make them stop fighting. James made a decision. Instead of just fighting for his own rights, he would fight for Emily's happiness. He would find a way to show the court that Lisa's actions were hurting their daughter. He didn't know how he would do it yet, but he knew one thing. He was not giving up. Emily was too young to understand courtrooms, lawyers, or legal battles. But she understood one thing very well. Her life was changing in ways she didn't like. Before her parents' divorce, she had both her mom and dad in her life. Now, she barely saw her father, and when she did, something always felt wrong. She noticed how her mother would get angry whenever she mentioned her father. If she said something as simple as, "Daddy makes the best pancakes," her mother's face would tighten. If she talked about missing him, Lisa would sigh loudly and say, "He doesn't care about us, Emily. You'll understand when you're older." At first, Emily didn't argue. She didn't want to make her mother upset. But deep down, she felt confused. She knew her father loved her. He always listened to her stories, helped with her homework, and made her feel safe. So why was her mother saying these things? Emily started paying closer attention to what was happening around her. She heard her mother talking to lawyers and friends, saying things about her father that didn't make sense. Lisa told people that James had never been a good parent, that he was careless, that Emily was scared of him. None of it was true. The worst part was that Lisa wanted Emily to say the same things. One day, Lisa sat her down and said, "Emily, when we go to court, you have to tell the judge that you want to stay with me. If they ask, say that you don't feel safe with your father." Emily's heart pounded. "But that's not true," she whispered. Lisa's expression changed. "Do you want to live with me or with him?" she asked firmly. "If you don't say the right things, you might have to go with your father, and I won't be able to take care of you anymore." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. She didn't want to choose between her parents. She loved them both. But her mother's words scared her. She didn't want to lose her. So she nodded slowly, though she didn't feel right about it. As the custody battle continued, Emily felt like she was carrying a heavy secret. She wanted to tell her father the truth, but she was afraid. What if her mother got mad? What if something bad happened because of her? One evening, during a short visit with her father, Emily sat quietly, staring at her plate. James noticed her silence. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Emily hesitated, then whispered, "Daddy, do you think I'll get in trouble if I tell the truth?" James's heart clenched. He looked at his daughter's worried face and knew something was wrong. He put his hand over hers and said softly, "You should never be afraid to tell the truth, Emily. No matter what happens, I will always be here for you." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything else. James knew he couldn't push her. She needed time. But he also realized something important. His daughter was struggling with more than just missing him. Lisa was making her feel guilty, making her feel like she had to choose. James had been trying to prove his own innocence in court, but now he understood that the real battle was for Emily's happiness. He needed to show the court what was really happening, not just for himself, but for his daughter. Emily didn't know it yet, but soon she would make a decision that would change everything. And when she finally spoke the truth, no one would be able to ignore it. Emily felt like she was trapped in a world where she couldn't say what was really in her heart. Every time she wanted to talk about her father, she hesitated. Every time she missed him, she kept it to herself. And every time her mother reminded her to say the right things in court, she felt a weight pressing down on her little shoulders. She didn't understand why things had to be this way. Before the divorce, she had two loving parents. Now she felt like she had to choose between them, and it scared her. She loved her mother, but she also loved her father. And deep down, she knew her father had never done anything wrong. The day before the next court hearing, Lisa sat down with Emily again. "Tomorrow is very important," she said. "Remember what I told you. You have to tell the judge that you feel safer with me. If you say the wrong thing, things could get really bad." Emily's stomach twisted. "Bad how?" she asked nervously. Lisa sighed. "If they think your father is a good parent, they might make you stay with him more. And if that happens, I won't be there to take care of you. You don't want that, do you?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't know what to say. She didn't want to make her mother upset, but she also didn't want to lie. The more she thought about it, the more she felt like something wasn't right. That night, Emily lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about all the time she had spent with her father, the bedtime stories, the silly jokes, the way he always made her feel better when she was sad. He had never done anything to make her feel unsafe. He had never spoken badly about her mother, even when he was sad. He had always told her that she could talk to him about anything. Emily took a deep breath. "Daddy said I should never be afraid to tell the truth," she whispered to herself. "Maybe it's time I do." The next morning, the courtroom was quiet as Emily sat down in the witness chair. The judge spoke to her gently, asking simple questions about her life with her parents. At first, she answered carefully, afraid of making her mother upset. But when the judge asked her who she wanted to live with, Emily hesitated. She could feel her mother's eyes on her. She could hear her words in her head. Say the right things. But then, she remembered her father's kind face and the way he had told her that the truth was always the best choice. Emily swallowed hard and looked at the judge. "I love my mom," she said, her voice small but steady. "But my dad is a good father. He never did anything bad. He loves me, and I love him." Lisa stiffened in her seat, her expression frozen. The judge nodded. "Do you feel safe with your father?" Emily nodded. "Yes." Silence filled the room. Lisa had spent months telling the court that Emily was scared of her father. But now, Emily herself had spoken the truth, and no one could ignore her words. James felt tears in his eyes, but he held them back. He had never been prouder of his daughter. She had found the courage to speak, even when it was hard. Lisa tried to argue, but the damage was done. The truth was finally out. And soon, everything was going to change. The courtroom was silent after Emily spoke. James could see the shock on Lisa's face. She had never expected Emily to tell the truth. For months, Lisa had controlled the story, making James look like an unfit father. But now, Emily had shattered all those lies with just a few honest words. Lisa quickly regained her composure. She leaned forward and said, "Emily, sweetheart, you don't understand. Mommy is just trying to protect you." Her voice was soft, but there was panic in her eyes. Emily looked down at her hands. She felt nervous, but she also felt lighter, as if she had just let go of a heavy secret. "Mom, I know you love me," she said softly. "But Daddy loves me too, and he never did anything wrong." James felt his heart swell with pride. His little girl had just done something incredibly brave. She had spoken the truth, even when it was difficult. The judge cleared his throat and turned to Lisa. Miss Carter, your daughter has made it clear that she feels safe with her father. Do you have anything to say about this? Lisa opened her mouth, but for the first time, she had no response. She had spent so much time convincing everyone that James was a bad father, but now even Emily had spoken against her claims. James's lawyer took the opportunity to speak. Your Honor, this entire case has been built on false accusations. The mother has attempted to manipulate the court by influencing their child. We believe it is in Emily's best interest to have a fair relationship with both parents. The judge nodded slowly. I have reviewed all the evidence, and now, hearing from Emily herself, I must say that this case is taking a very different turn. Lisa's lawyer tried to argue, saying that Emily was too young to understand what was best for her, but the judge was not convinced. If Emily had shown fear or hesitation about being with her father, it would be a different story, but she has spoken clearly. We cannot ignore that. James watched as Lisa's confidence crumbled. She had been so sure that she would win, but now, the truth was finally coming out. After a short break, the judge made his decision. The court finds that there is no evidence to support the claim that Mr. Walker is an unfit parent. The previous restrictions on his visitation rights will be lifted. From now on, custody will be shared equally. James felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had been fighting for so long, and now finally, justice was being served. Lisa, however, was furious. As they left the courtroom, she pulled Emily aside and whispered, "You don't understand what you've done." Emily looked up at her mother with sad eyes. "I just told the truth," she said simply. James walked over and put a protective arm around his daughter. He looked at Lisa and said firmly, "This isn't about winning or losing. This is about Emily having both of her parents in her life." Lisa didn't respond. She just turned away, her expression unreadable. As they stepped outside the courthouse, James knelt down beside Emily. "I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice full of emotion. "You were so brave today." Emily hugged him tightly. "I was scared," she admitted, "but I didn't want to lie." James smiled and kissed the top of her head. "That's what makes you special, sweetheart. You always do what's right." For the first time in months, James felt hopeful. He knew the battle wasn't completely over. Lisa would still be difficult, and co-parenting would have its challenges. But for now, he had won something far more important than just a case. James finally felt like he could breathe again. For months, he had been fighting a battle that seemed impossible to win. But now, thanks to Emily's courage, the truth had come out. He had the right to be in his daughter's life again, and nothing could take that away. However, James knew that things wouldn't be easy. Lisa was not someone who gave up without a fight. Even though the court had ruled in his favor, he could see the anger in her eyes. She was not happy with the decision, and he knew she would make co-parenting difficult. A few days after the court hearing, James picked Emily up for his first official weekend with her. He was excited to finally spend real time with his daughter, without restrictions. But when Emily got into the car, she looked sad. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" James asked gently. Emily sighed and played with the straps of her backpack. "Mom is mad at me," she said quietly. "She barely talked to me after court. She keeps saying I betrayed her." James's heart ached for his daughter. He had expected Lisa to react this way, but it hurt him to see Emily caught in the middle. He reached over and held her small hand. "Emily, you didn't do anything wrong. You were honest, and that's all that matters. Your mom will need time to accept it, but you can't blame yourself for telling the truth." Emily nodded, but James could tell that she was still worried. He decided to focus on making their time together special. That weekend, they did all the things Emily loved. They baked cookies, went to the park, and watched her favorite movies. James wanted her to feel safe and happy, to remind her that no matter what happened, she would always have a loving home with him. By Sunday evening, Emily seemed more relaxed. She hugged James tightly before he drove her back to her mother's house. "I had so much fun, Daddy," she said with a big smile. "I wish weekends lasted longer." James chuckled. "Me too, sweetheart. But don't worry, we'll have many more weekends like this." However, when they arrived at Lisa's house, the mood changed. Lisa stood by the door, arms crossed, her expression cold. "You're late," she said sharply, even though James was right on time. Emily immediately shrank back, sensing the tension. James didn't want to argue in front of her, so he simply said, "We had a great weekend. Emily had a lot of fun." Lisa didn't respond. Instead, she looked at Emily and said, "Go inside. We need to talk." Emily hesitated. She looked at her father, then back at her mother. Finally, she gave James one last hug before walking inside. James watched as the door closed behind her. He hated the idea of Lisa making Emily feel guilty, but he also knew he couldn't control what happened in her house. As he drove home, James thought about what the future would look like. Co-parenting with Lisa would be difficult, but he was determined to stay strong for Emily. No matter what Lisa did, she couldn't change one simple fact. Emily loved her father, and she knew the truth now. James promised himself that he would never stop fighting for his daughter's happiness. This wasn't just about winning a court case. It was about being the father Emily deserved, no matter how many challenges lay ahead. Over the next few weeks, James noticed a change in Emily. She was happier when she was with him. But when he dropped her off at Lisa's house, her smile would fade. She never complained, but James could tell that something was bothering her. One evening, during their scheduled video call, Emily looked nervous. She kept glancing at her bedroom door, as if she was afraid someone might walk in. "Daddy," she whispered, "Mom doesn't like when I talk about you." James sighed. He had expected this, but hearing it from Emily still hurt. "Did she say something to you?" he asked gently. Emily hesitated, then nodded. "She says I made a mistake in court. She says you tricked me into saying nice things about you." James's chest tightened. He had never said a bad word about Lisa, but she was filling Emily's mind with guilt. "Sweetheart, no one tricked you. You spoke from your heart, and that was the bravest thing you could have done." Emily bit her lip. "I know, but sometimes I feel bad. I don't want Mom to be mad at me." James understood. Emily loved her mother, and she just wanted peace. He wished Lisa would see that, instead of making their daughter feel torn between them. "Listen to me," James said softly. "You are never responsible for how grown-ups feel. You told the truth because it was the right thing to do. I don't ever want you to feel guilty for that." Emily nodded slowly, but James could tell that part of her was still struggling. As time passed, Lisa continued to make things difficult. She made excuses to cancel visits, delayed drop-offs, and ignored James's messages. It was frustrating, but James stayed patient. He refused to let Lisa's actions affect his relationship with Emily. One day, during one of their weekends together, Emily surprised James by saying, "Daddy, can I tell you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. You can tell me anything." Emily took a deep breath. "I don't like how Mom talks about you. It makes me feel bad. I wish she would stop." James felt a lump in his throat. This was what he had been waiting for, not for Emily to take sides, but for her to recognize that she didn't have to be caught in the middle. "You don't have to listen when people say things that don't feel right," James told her. "It's okay to love both of us. You don't have to choose." Emily smiled, as if a weight had been lifted from her heart. "I love you, Daddy." James hugged her tightly. "I love you too, sweetheart. Always." Over time, things didn't magically become perfect, but they did get better. Lisa eventually realized that she couldn't control everything. The court's decision stood firm, and James remained a steady, loving presence in Emily's life. Emily grew more confident, no longer afraid to speak up about her feelings. And as she got older, she understood even more about what had happened. She saw that her father had always been there for her, even when things were hard. Years later, as a teenager, she would look back on that time and realize just how much strength it had taken to stand up for the truth. And she would always be grateful that she did. Because in the end, love and honesty had won.